What's up, ladies and gentlemen? Aaron Nix from the Wrestle Plug, and I am back to review Impact Wrestling. Great to be talking about Impact Wrestling again. I promised many weeks ago that I would cover more Impact Wrestling, and here I am to discuss tonight's Impact Wrestling, which has just got done. So Impact Wrestling for me has always been a labour of love. I feel like Impact Wrestling has one of the better... I feel like Impact Wrestling is one of the better shows in terms of entertainment, but it doesn't always necessarily translate to a good audience. There's such a stigma around Impact Wrestling because of what happened with TNA. Now, for many years, TNA was really good. And then all of a sudden, it kind of fell off a cliff pretty rapidly. Problem was, they hadn't built up the credibility. They hadn't built up the long-term viewership that someone like WWE had. So even when WWE burns their fans and they lose a lot of ratings, overall people still check in with the product from time to time. With TNA, it was a case of, you've kind of burned us, we're not interested anymore, we're leaving. Simple as that, really. And that's a shame, because for me, I think this product is actually at one of its best points. That being said, this Impact was very much a labour of love. Some things hit, some things don't. That's just the way it is. Obviously, being a fan as well, it's subjective to what my opinion is. First and foremost, the main event of the show, Eddie Edwards versus Sammy Callahan, is always going to draw my interest to a certain extent because of what happened initially. Obviously, people will remember that organic baseball attack. Here we are, baseball bat attack, excuse me. Obviously, here we are a little bit further down the line. The problem was, this didn't really feel like a big deal. It wasn't presented as one, even though it was the main event, until we saw what happened after the match. I quite like the fact that the match pretty much started and then was over with. The referee threw it out. Before that, it was very much like a proper hardcore match. I really like Sammy Callahan. And in his initial run, when he started becoming the draw, and he was having death matches with Penta, and he had that incredible rivalry with Tessa Blanchard, you felt like he was truly on the right trajectory. Sammy Callahan is going to be one of those guys, I feel, that when his career is done, people are going to remember him as the guy who helped elevate other people more so than himself. But he's actually a really credible star in his own right. I have always spoken about the fact that I don't believe that TNA/Impact is always the place where people go to die. I actually think that it's a good place for a number of people to resurrect themselves. If you want a good example of that, Rich Swann, Impact World Wrestling Champion. Wasn't bad in WWE, was Cruiserweight Champion for a little bit, obviously had problems with the domestic abuse issues involving his wife. That's not for me to comment on now. That's obviously water under the bridge, so to speak. That's been dealt with, and that's where it should stay. Rich Swann has done a very good job of resurrecting his career, resurrecting his life, overcoming a lot of demons, etc. And has really done a great job. And he's now the focal point and figurehead of this company. TJP is another good example of that, who I'll discuss in a moment with the Manic angle. Sam Callahan is another one of those guys. Never did anything in NXT. Here he is, really getting to express himself creatively, and that's the most important thing about Sammy Callahan, is the fact that he's so good at expressing himself creatively. That being said, I'm not feeling this rivalry as much as I did earlier on, mostly because it's recycled. Ken Shamrock's involved now. I don't care. I loved Ken Shamrock when I was young. Being a martial artist myself, doing martial arts when I was much younger, I really looked up to Ken Shamrock, and I loved the idea of seeing proper, legitimate martial artists in wrestling. Him, Steve Blackman, they kind of helped break down barriers, and then we saw even more people, Olympic wrestlers like Kurt Angle and Shelton Benjamin, and the crossover now is so blurred, you wouldn't really recognise it. It feels like half the roster has some sort of background in combat sports or some form of athleticism outside of professional wrestling. But Ken Shamrock is an old man now, and don't get me wrong, he's still shredded. He can still whoop most of our asses, but he's not a draw to me, and it feels like he's just been put with Sammy Callahan because I don't really have much else for him to do. Callahan has definitely, for me, lost a little bit of his luster because of the unfortunate nature of what happened with OVE, and obviously the individuals involved in that. And since then, he's kind of been out on his own. That's not to say that he's boring, that he's shit. He's still fantastic. I love Sammy Callahan, huge fan of his. And as I've always said on this podcast, I'm sure if he listened to it or watched it, he'd tell me to shut my big fat face, and that's absolutely fine too. And he'd probably say it in a much more aggressive way than that, if we're being honest. And then he'd probably clamp me with a baseball bat, and that's fine too. But I'm not really feeling this angle. I like Eddie Edwards. I love Alicia Edwards, actually. I think that she's one of the main focal points and drawing points of this angle. She's so good at facial expressions. She's really good at acting. She's great at conveying this kind of tough but also vulnerable woman at times, who obviously cares for her husband greatly, which is lovely. Obviously being, genuine husband and wife obviously helps no end in that regard, I imagine. And it works from that perspective, but this just feels like kind of a cheap rerun of everything that went down prior to it, and all the sort of cinematic stuff we had with Alicia being in hospital and things like that. That was all, for me, top quality, compelling fictional television, and this isn't so much. It was all okay. The ending was quite nice, being backstage, but I wasn't that fussed. The other thing that people are going to be talking about from these impacts in particular, of course, the inclusion of the AEW World Champion Kenny Omega. I upset a lot of people because I'm not his biggest fan. Do I think he's terrible? No. Do I think he's a bad wrestler? Obviously not. He is no doubt one of the most talented athletes in professional wrestling. It's just not my cup of tea. I don't really enjoy his promos. I find them a bit boring, a bit bland. I think him with the Good Brothers is a good idea. And obviously Don Callis is an incredible mouthpiece, so that covers a lot of the issues you might say Kenny Omega would have if you're being hypercritical of him. For me, Kenny Omega isn't a huge star. I don't see him as a massive star. That's just my opinion personally. Like, if I was in charge of AEW, I wouldn't have him as heavyweight champion. Obviously, people are going to say, well, he's a much more credible and exciting and marquee champion than Rich Swann. That might be the case because Rich Swann works for a much smaller company in tow. But at the same time, I think Rich Swann has a lot more to offer as a champion than Kenny Omega does. And we saw that with his promo with the Motor City Machine Guns. Now, obviously, it's not their fault that a lot of this stuff takes place on this bus right now, because obviously Impact tapes in advance. So until Hard to Kill, which I believe is when is the culmination of their current taping schedule, there's not really anything you can do in terms of fresh content. You've just got to kind of splice these things in. I find them a bit boring, a bit tedious. The first one you kind of understood and you thought, oh, this is quite cool. This is pretty historic in a lot of ways, seeing a world champion from a different company on their show, even though it wasn't technically on the show as such, as it was just a pre-tape vignette and a bus. Now it's just become a bit boring. Putting the Good Brothers with him feels like a bit of a cheap Bullet Club grab for me. Doesn't interest me in the slightest. I'd be far more excited if I saw the Good Brothers linking up with Finn Balor and AJ Styles. And obviously we saw the Good Brothers, of course, link up with AJ Styles in WWE. That for me was far more interesting and exciting. And obviously WWE's budget kind of helped out there. I also don't like the Tony's infomercials that they're throwing in. I know that's going to upset a lot of people. I don't think Tony Khan should be on camera at all. I think he's cheesy. I think he's a bit tacky and frankly trash when he talks to the camera. He just doesn't come across as legitimate in any way. Standing there with his arms folded, trying to look all tough. And I'm just like, you look like somebody's accountant, mate. I'm not impressed. And Tony Schiavone, don't get me wrong, Tony Schiavone has done amazing things for this business, no question. And I grew up listening to him as the voice of WCW, along with Bobby the Brain Heenan. And there's no questioning his credibility in the business, but at this point, he just looks like somebody who's there to collect a paycheck, and he looks stupid, and it's not my cup of tea. Sorry. And I know AEW fans will vehemently defend Tony Khan because they see him as this kind of father figure. I'm not as easily impressed by simple things like that. I don't think he comes across as real or human in any way. He's ultimately the son of a billionaire. I don't have any relatability to Tony Khan. I think he's done an amazing job, and he's handled Brody Lee, John Huber's passing beautifully, and he deserves a lot of love and credit for that. But he's not my cup of tea, and frankly, these infomercials are just the wrong side of cheesy for me. And I'm not interested in seeing AEW. I'm interested in seeing Impact. I know a lot of people are saying that this is a fantastic time with a crossover and that. I'm sure an invasion angle would probably be much more of an interest to me, but right now there isn't really much going on other than Kenny Omega every now and then taking snide little shots at Impact with Don Callis and kind of sitting backstage. And I just think, I don't care, if I'm being honest. Kenny Omega doesn't feel like a bigger star for these either. I've seen people on the internet saying Kenny's promos are incredible. Not really. I find them boring. I find them bland. Don Callis is doing the majority of the talking. When Kenny Omega talks, he doesn't come across as a huge star. He's a bit nerdy. He's a little bit meh. And people might say, well, you're a fat nerd who talks about wrestling. Well, yeah, but that's my wheelhouse. Kenny Omega is a shredded, world-class athlete. I don't want to see a guy who runs around talking about Twitch and stuff like that. That's, people are saying, oh, that makes him more relatable. But does it? Look at Kenny Omega and then look at yourself. He's nothing like us. You know, you want relatability. You want somebody who can kind of understand the same kind of journey that you've traveled. Kenny Omega isn't that sort of person to me, but I'm obviously a little bit biased in the sense that he's just, you know, somebody I've never been that enamored with. I loved his work in NJPW. That was my favorite form of Kenny Omega. I felt like he expressed himself far better in that company as well. In a North American market, I don't actually think he's that big a deal. I really don't. And I know that upsets people. There are a multitude of wrestlers who, for my money, are far more interesting. So I actually kind of tune these segments out a little bit. I do. Even with the Good Brothers involved, who are legitimately two of my most favourite wrestlers. I love them. They're charismatic. They're hilarious. And they obviously help bring across Kenny Omega more. Motor City Machine Guns and Rich Swann tried to get the jump on them, banging on the bus. They inevitably got jumped outside the bus and got beaten up. For me, now I'm sure that 6-man tag team match at Hard to Kill is going to be fantastic, and of course I'll be watching Hard to Kill. But for me, you know, you three guys should be able to kick the shit out of Motor City Machine Guns and Rich Swann, with all due respect. They are massive by comparison. It looked like 3 heavyweights beating up 3 cruiserweights. So from that perspective, whatever. Now in the ring, obviously, it's a different story, but I'm sorry, it doesn't interest me. And ultimately, I think every single one of these segments has been boring. It has. I have no interest in hearing about it, and they keep regurgitating the same boring crap over and over. It's been done, and it's been done better by other people. That's just pretty much all I have to say about that. One thing I really enjoyed from this Impact was the women's interactions. I scream to the high heavens about how shit AEW is at booking women, and I still believe that to be the case. I'm sorry, but it is. You can say you've got a women's title match on Dynamite once every other week. That's great, but if they haven't got meaningful storylines and regular TV time to build themselves as characters like some of the other people have, then I'm not interested. I don't want to see Sting. I want to see Hikaru Shida on my TV more. Simple as. Impact has never had a problem with that. We had Deonna Perazo coming out with Kimberly, squaring up to Ty Valkyrie, of course, who's after a title shot with Rosemary, talking about, you know, just kind of a slanging contest. It was good. It felt fairly relatable and believable. You know, it was a genuine collision between two what feels like big female stars. We also had the backstage interactions where we saw not Susie, not Sue Young, but Susan, which I'm very interested by. She looked like a very sexy accountant. Not the bad one like Tony Khan, the good one. You know what I mean? She looked very, very gorgeous, of course. And, you know, she's really flexing her creativity, and I love that. This is a third character under her notch, and it shows that she's got so much credibility. Can you imagine what she'd be able to do with a big budget like AEW? Like, the fact that someone like AEW hasn't tried to make use of some of these talents more speaks volumes about their lack of understanding of women's wrestling compared to Impact. Impact has always been, for me, right behind NXT in terms of one of the best women's rosters in the world. And it shows it here. And of course, we had a tag team match to decide who would make the finals of the Knockout Tag Team title tournament. Grace and Jazz, or as I like to call them, Graceful Jazz, whatever, that's the best I can do, sorry. They took on Havoc and Nevaeh. Jessica Havoc, obviously. And this was actually a big shock because Havoc and Nevaeh went over. And I honestly thought the idea was going to be that Grace and Jazz would get to the final, they would lose, and then we would have the singles match. And they kind of reversed that a little bit, actually. And now we're going to get this weekend at Genesis, which is kind of like a pre-pay-per-view, Too Hard to Kill. We're going to get Grace versus Jazz in more of a kind of match of respect, which I think is awesome. But I'm really shocked that Nevaeh and Havoc won. I think it's good because what it says is they are a more legitimate tag team. They've been together longer. They've been in a company longer. They should technically have one over on Jazz and Jordan Grace, who are two phenomenal single stars who are teaming up. And I like that. That shows credibility and respect to tag team wrestling. Take note again, AEW. Sorry, but I feel like Impact does a better job of looking after certain assets of wrestling and certain facets of what we love about wrestling more than AEW does. Case in point, this tag team division and this tag team tournament. Huge surprise. Love that powerbomb, by the way, that Havoc gave to Jordan Grace. Wow. extreme power. Jessica Havoc, really underrated actually as a talent. But I'll tell you what I really liked in this match, who people don't talk about enough, Nevaeh. She's beautiful, she's powerful, she's menacing, she's got a great presence, great look, she can talk reasonably well. I like her. I think she's got a big future. Her, Jessica Havoc, I mean, all four women in this match are fantastic. Jazz was one of my favourite wrestlers back in the day. Loved the fact that she was constantly squaring up to men and kicking their ass. I thought that was so cool, so empowering, not just for women, but for myself as well. I thought that was awesome. And it also really, she was one of the first people who opened my eyes to the idea of intergender wrestling, well before it became such a testy hot topic like it is now. Back then, you know, I saw her whipping people's asses, you know, like the sexiest man alive in in ECW. You know, she has been doing this for the better part of 3 decades and doing it better than most women ever have. I have so much love and respect for Jazz. Big fan, obviously, and really excited to see what that match with Jordynne Grace gives us at Genesis. Genesis looks good. I wanted to give a shout out actually to Matthew Palmer. This year, well, I would say young lad. I mean, he's been on the independents for a long time. Apparently, he's been wrestling around 15 years now. He was a security guard, obviously, on a previous Impact, who accidentally ripped Moose's gear, and this led to Moose stating that he wouldn't last 3 minutes in the ring with him. And of course, you knew immediately we were going to get that 3-minute challenge, so to speak. This kid cut a great promo beforehand, really liked it. He felt believable. A great babyface promo, fire, kind of like, you know what, I'm not here. You know, I didn't travel 10 hours just to get my ass handed to me and skulk off, or, you know, I'm here to actually try and make an impact, so to speak, excuse the pun. And he most definitely did that with a sneaky little assist from Willie Mack, who, by the way, I love. I absolutely love Willie Mack. Great stuff. Matthew Palmer beats Moose, technically. I mean, he doesn't beat him, but he survives 3 minutes with him, so technically the idea was that if he survived 3 minutes, then he won the match. So, hey, he technically beat the TNA World Champion. Whether you believe in that belt or not. And by the way, Moose, what a presence he's got. And do you know what I love about him? He feels like a bigger star. He does. He feels like a huge, big mainstream wrestler. Big star, big powerhouse, chiseled, genuine former professional footballer, athlete, all these things. And yet, here he is, you know, helping put other talent over at the same time. He had that great cinematic match with EC3 as well. He seems to be able to do a lot of different things, Moose, and I don't think people talk about him enough as a genuine contender. I don't want to say all the time that, oh, I'd love to see this guy go to WWE, but you have to accept that WWE has the big budget. They are the biggest company, so to speak. And although they don't necessarily always do well by people, they definitely have the capabilities and the finances to maximize talent better than anybody else. And I feel like Moose is somebody who might actually benefit from a big WWE run. He's somebody I feel who could walk into the door, make an immediate impact, pun intended, and really come across as a star. You know, if you inserted him, say, this week on NXT into that match that involves Damian Priest and Killer Cross, he'd look fantastic. Talk about the meaty Hoss triple threat to win them all. And I would like to see Moose doing more, and hopefully Impact has more for him, because one thing I will say is he's on a tear here and he's building up his stock really nicely. And also, great to see him wrestling Willie Mack. I feel that Willie Mack is one of the most underrated wrestlers in the world. He's crazy inspiring to me. He's got the perfect body type. He's by no means ugly or anything like that. I'm not trying to point that out, but, you know, he's not chiseled to the gills. But as far as athleticism and storytelling goes and character, he's one of the best Impact has to offer. And he's frankly one of the best in the world, in my opinion. I really believe that. Impact strength for me comes from actually things that you don't see much of. The little backstage things. There are quite a lot of these. They do way too many really good backstage segments that you don't get enough of. For instance, we had Rohit Raju and Chris Bay kind of conspiring to deal with TJP, who is, spoiler alert, Manic, who is the X Division champion. You know, and it was really fun seeing TJP sitting in between the two of them. They're really overdressed in his eyes. He takes that cheap little shine. By the way, Chris Bay looks so fly, so swag. Like, man, Chris Bay is putting us all to shame with his fashion. By the way, Chris Bay, genuinely one of the biggest rising stars in the world. He is so freaking talented. I cannot get over how good that guy is. Genuinely a world champion in the making in every sense, wherever he goes. Very excited to see what Chris Bay does in his future. But I like that segment. It was fun. It was entertaining. Everybody felt accomplished and was good talkers and good characters. Love how TJP's like kind of winking at the camera, like, oh, me and Manic don't get on. We're like water and oil. I like that stuff. Entertaining. But what can you say when it comes to entertainment? Ethan Page is incredible. Every time I do these reviews, I feel like I'm talking about how good Ethan Page is. He is so entertaining. Every few years, Impact produces a talent that feels like a world-class performer and entertainer. They had EC3, incredible, felt like the next Rock in a lot of ways. They had Eli Drake, who of course, again, felt like a modern day Rock in a lot of ways. And here we are with Ethan Page doing exactly the same thing. Absolutely killer promo work, world-class entertainment value, funny, hilarious, everything. He has such an incredible range on him. And every time you watch his segments, you can't help but feel happy. They make you smile. They make you feel better about yourself as a human being. I'm really impressed with what Ethan Page does. I love the Karate Man gimmick. And I love this. He's sitting there. He's kind of getting therapy. And then he's like, are you even listening? And he turns around and it's Karate Man. It's him, but his alter ego. And he's sitting there talking to him. And he calls him a bitch. And I'm like, oh my God, this is fucking gold. And immediately I'm thinking, oh my God, wrestle each other, give me what I want. And then immediately he's like, do you know what, I'm gonna fight you at Hard to Kill, as if this pay-per-view isn't worthy of being bought enough. This for me is genuinely the match I want to see most, because I'm hoping they're going to go full insane TNA final deletion style cinematic with this, and this could be really special. I want them to go full Bloodsport with it. I've just actually finished watching Bloodsport again. Bloodsport is one of my favourite films of all time. Really cheesy Jean-Claude Van Damme martial arts film. It was the film that really opened my eyes and made me fall in love with martial arts for whatever reason. And when he said Kumite, I was like, oh God, yes. Give me what I want. I want them to film a proper Bloodsport style fight scene. I want them to have nods to all the great martial arts films. I think it's going to be incredible. I have every single bit of faith that Ethan Page can pull this off and make this truly one of the great things to remember. Hey, this is the first Impact of the new year, and Ethan Page has already dropped a promo that is worthy of being the promo of the year with this interaction with his alter ego, the Karate Man. Come on. Man is super, super talented. Give him everything he deserves. I'm going to drop a column soon, actually, for WrestlePlug.com, a little article that I'd like you guys to check out. And actually, I mentioned Ethan Page in it, and it's 5 people who I believe should be world champion in their company by now. And he's somebody that I spoke vehemently about because I'm so passionate about what he does. I did want to mention quickly, I wish they'd do more with Danielle Dashwood. I really do. You know, this crappy little gimmick she's got where she's walking around with this kind of selfie guy, photographer, publicist, whatever you want to call him. I don't think it works. I find him tacky. It's not that he's necessarily horrible, but for me, what annoys me is that Danielle Dashwood was somebody who, as Emma, felt like a big deal in WWE. She was a legitimate contender. I know that she left that company under very suspicious sort of manners, and, you know, there was the business with Asuka and yeah, everything that kind of went down with that, and ultimately she wanted out of it by the end of it for whatever reason. Creative differences, don't know, none of my business. But it doesn't feel like Impact has done anything with her since getting their hands on her. She should be really consistently vying for a title. She should be one of the more premium talents you have, and instead she seems to be reduced to walking around backstage as some sort of over-the-top diva, and I just think that's a waste. She's super, super stunning. Super beautiful woman, insanely talented in the ring, incredibly athletic. She's got great crossover appeal. She has such a great social media following. Do more with her. Do better by her. I know that you've got so many talented women, but you can find room for someone like this for more than just these tacky little knockoff promos backstage. She can do more than that. Also, by the way, Cody Dean has shaved his head. Not really feeling this whole Eric Young angle. I like Eric Young, but I don't really care about his random slapdash faction he's got going on. Cosplay Stan Hansen doesn't do anything for me. Joe Doring, whatever. Also looked like he was wearing the bear from The Revenant. whatever. Not really of interest to me. But Cody Dean looks sick with a bald head, by the way. Really appreciating that as a fellow bald-headed brother myself. Always got time for that, Mr. Dean. Look like a badass. Be very curious to see what they do with him going forward. But yeah, the whole story, it just felt like a lot of random wrestlers that were thrown into the same storyline. Bit of a mishmash for me. Could do better. But ultimately, still entertaining. And ultimately, it's only 2 hours as well. I like the fact that it's free to watch on Twitch. Still not free to watch over here. Sort out the region blocking Impact. Seriously, come on. Do better than that. Because I could watch all number of streamers all across the world on Twitch, but for some reason I can't watch your channel. I've got to watch Jessica Havoc. And don't get me wrong, I'm very grateful for that. Thank you very much, Jessica Havoc. But at the same time, come on. Do better, because you've got a fantastic audience over here. And I know the argument is that you can see TNA on free TV, so to speak, over here, but it's actually not. It's actually very difficult to get hold of. It's on a very obscure channel that actually, if you don't have a certain package, you can't get access to. So I would like to see them do better for that. But ultimately, a very good wrestling show in terms of entertainment. Just not their best show, if I'm being honest, but still definitely worth the watch every week. And I really do implore people, check out twitch.tv, go to the Impact Wrestling channel, it's free to watch. Impact Plus is $5 a month, you get some great pay-per-views. I'll be watching Genesis, I'll be dropping predictions for that too, so watch out for that video. But for now, I shall leave you to it. I've been Aaron Nix. Thank you very much for watching, and we'll catch you very soon for more content from the Wrestle Plug.